This is Black and White Makes Gray, a memoir of an interracial childhood by Judith Davidson. Chapter 14. A few days before school was scheduled to start, I found myself in the counseling office at Grant High School trying to create a course schedule for my junior year. Still paneled in the dark varnished wood of an earlier era, it smelled of student angst, sweat, hormones, and upset plans. I was staring at a blackboard upon which had been drawn a spreadsheet of courses, instructors, the number of students each class currently held, and notes about restrictions and other issues. An older white-haired woman was helping me translate the abbreviations and numbers. We had just come up against yet another in a series of barriers regarding the last class I needed to fill my schedule. "I'm sorry," she said. "It looks like basket weaving is already full. If you had registered earlier, I think you would have had more choices." "I know, but we just moved," I said as my eyes scanned the blackboard, feeling a certain amount of desperation. With my interest in sewing, I was very disappointed basket weaving in the art department was full, but there had to be something else. I looked back down at my schedule. Junior English, Junior Social Studies, third year French, Drama 1. No math or science. Too bad. Finished those courses at Lincoln High School. But I needed another elective. Where could it be hiding, I wondered. The fact I was conducting this negotiation on my own was a testament to my mother's faith in my ability to act independently, and to the fact she now had 6 children, not 4, and simply didn't have time to get to school herself as well as to make it to every appointment where she might be needed. It went without saying that Evan would not accompany us on a mission like signing up for high school classes, especially for this high school that served a predominantly white community. "What is J6? I asked, pointing at a place on the board. "Japanese." "Interesting." My parents, particularly my father, had a strong interest in Japanese. One of his oldest friends was a specialist in Japanese woodblock prints. "Is it open?" I asked. "Yes, it has just 6 students." "Great. Count me in," I said. When I made that quick decision, I was only thinking of the immediate moment and how signing up for the Japanese language class solved the problem of my schedule. I had no idea of the many repercussions this decision would have on my life. As the year wore on, however, Japanese was one of the best things about my time at Grant High School. "Ohayo gozaimasu, sensei desu." Or, as you would say in English, "Good morning, I'm the teacher." The sturdy Japanese-American woman standing in front of the blackboard spoke to us with a pleasant smile. "You can call me sensei. That's what students would do in Japan. Sensei means teacher." "Sensei," we repeated. She handed out large red textbooks to the 7 of us in the room. It had been written by her teacher at the University of Washington, Tamako Niwa, where our sensei had graduated just that spring. My ears perked up at this because the University of Washington was one of the colleges to which I wanted to apply, and I hoped the Japanese teacher would have tips on how to get in. I opened the textbook and was surprised to see that it was written in the same script English used. "Why is it written this way?" a young man with long, thick, blonde hair asked. "Aren't we going to be learning to write with characters?" Sensei smiled. "The textbook is written in what we call romanization. This makes it easier for English speakers to read as you're getting started learning the language. But you're right. The Japanese do use characters to write their language. However, That's not the only writing system they use. She went to the blackboard and wrote a line in Japanese. She started at the top of the blackboard and wrote down from there, not left to right. It appeared to be a mixture of symbols, some more complicated than the others. Gakko e ikimasu, she said, pointing to the symbols that corresponded to her sounds. She wrote each sound in the Romanized script next to the symbols to which she was pointing. Gakko e ikimasu, we repeated dutifully. I go to school, translated Sensei. This is a very simple sentence, but you will be surprised how much you can learn about Japanese from it. Let's start with the writing system, since everyone is interested in that. Our teacher explained that the early Japanese did not have a written language. When they encountered the Chinese, they learned about written language and adopted the Chinese characters, along with many other cultural borrowings. Chinese writing was based on pictographs, which meant it used at least one symbol per word. She pointed to the characters for school and the character for the verb to go. I'll bet you also noticed there are some other symbols here, and she circled the symbols that look less complicated. We call these symbols hiragana, she said. She went on to explain that because Japanese and Chinese were from different language families with quite different underlying structures, sounds, and organizational systems, characters alone would not work to fully express the Japanese language. So the Japanese developed two new sets of syllabic symbols to combine with the Chinese characters to make the full sounds of Japanese. The two syllabic systems were phonetically identical, but the visual symbols were different and distinct. Hiragana, smooth, flowing, and elegant, was used to express the Japanese sounds that were not incorporated into the pronunciation of the Chinese character. Katakana, a blocky script, was used primarily for phonetic notes for Chinese pronunciation and the writing out of foreign words. Here's what this sentence looks like in katakana, Sensei said as she wrote the phrase in a new set of chunky symbols, which were clearly different from the characters in the hiragana. We're going to start off learning hiragana and katakana, the two phonetic systems, and then we will begin to learn some of the simplest and often used characters, or kana, as the Japanese would call them. This seemed like it was going to be a hard class. As I glanced to the side, I noticed a teenager sitting near me, the only black person in this tiny group of students. His head was bent low over a drawing that looked like a naval battle in World War II. A lot of little people were falling off a naval destroyer into the water. That was the first, but not the last time I noticed him drawing World War II naval battle scenes like this. He drew these scenes obsessively throughout the school year, whenever he had a moment to himself. I wondered if there were others in the class with equally strange passions. Was that why so few people had signed up for Japanese? Did others know that the people who took Japanese were different from run-of-the-mill teenagers? I wanted to say something to the group like, I'm not really like you. I just needed another class to fill my schedule. I wondered if there were others here who had accidentally dropped in as I felt I had. But then I had to turn my attention back to Japanese, which was getting more complicated by the minute, as the teacher went on to describe several other points of grammar that we would find different from English. This is nothing like French, I said aloud to no one in particular. No, it's nothing like French or Spanish or German, Sensei agreed. As I said, it's even a different language family than Chinese. Our small group stared at the board, dumbfounded with the scope of how different Japanese would be from everything we had known about language up to then. As if reading our minds and feeling our growing apprehension, Sensei said, take it one day at a time, and gradually You will be surprised to realize how much you have learned. Let's get down to work learning hiragana. Once you've gotten that under your belt, you will feel very accomplished. She went to her desk, grabbed a stack of handouts, and passed one out to each of us. For the rest of the class time, we carefully practiced the first set of 5 symbols in the Japanese hiragana syllabary. A, I, U, E, O. First, we followed the exercises on the handout, as Sensei showed us how each symbol had to be written in a specific direction and order. Our handout had numbers next to each stroke to clue us into the order in which we needed to make them and where we needed to start each stroke. Then we wrote them on the blackboard as Sensei called them out to us. By the time the bell rang at the end of the period, everyone in the class was able to write the first 5 hiragana symbols. As we left the room, our teacher bowed to us, her hands folded against her thighs. Domo arigato, she said. That means thank you. We bowed back to her with our hands on our thighs, repeating, Domo arigato. I went back to my locker, head spinning. I was so caught up in Japanese, I even forgot to be scared about lunch and who would I eat with on my first day at school. Throughout the rest of the day, I found myself practicing the 5 hiragana symbols on the margins of my class papers. After the excitement of the Japanese class in the morning, I found my 3rd-year French class, the period after lunch, to be exceedingly calm and unremarkable. The French teacher was excellent, energetic, and funny, but I could hardly wait to get home and throw myself into studying the first lesson in the big red Japanese textbook. One of the great benefits of studying Japanese and French as well was that I had made my mother very proud, and that meant a lot to me. I wanted so badly for her to be proud of me for being smart and creative. I heard her brag about me in my language study to Bill when he came to visit from San Francisco, where he now lived. Judy's studying both French and Japanese. She'll be able to get out of Dodge. She could go to Paris, maybe even Tokyo. Bill nodded sagely. He and Mom both ranked Paris above San Francisco on their list of escape locations. And Tokyo was beyond the solar system in their minds. After hearing their conversation, I applied myself even more diligently to studying my 2 languages. On a trip to Seattle, I tried to talk to my father about my Japanese language study, thinking with his interest in Japanese art, he would be curious. I was sad but not surprised when, instead, he began to talk about something related to his own current life. I sighed and went with the flow. Self-centeredness, I thought, was a characteristic my father had in abundance. Sometimes I also wondered if he was trying to avoid topics that were meaningful to me or my siblings, afraid it would take him into uncharted territories like feelings, wants, desires, goals, the whole ball of wax. Perhaps he was afraid he might have to make a real commitment to us. That was even sadder to me. As much as I enjoyed the proud reactions of people like my mom and Bill, I was shocked by the negative reactions I encountered. Sometimes when I said I was studying Japanese, other teenagers would pull up their eyebrows, parodying what they considered to be an example of an Asian person. They'd stick out their teeth as if they had buck teeth and speak in a fake Chinese accent. It was disgusting. Older people with a chip on their shoulder about the Japanese might sneer, shrug, and turn their face away or say something snarky about the Japanese role in World War II. I was surprised to learn that, to some white people, the Japanese were a kind of Negro. I wondered what the Japanese in turn thought of us. Were they still trying to make sense of World War II in their culture? Did they hate us for dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Around this time, I was a frequent babysitter for Vaughn and Fee and was fascinated by their early language use. As a foreign language learner, I thought I was probably plodding and slow compared to them. After all, I didn't have the advantage of their language immersion program with 4 big brothers and sisters talking to them daily. This got me thinking about what it would be like to learn like that, speaking every day, interacting in the language when I bought food, greeted people, took a bus, or went to a restaurant. Total immersion seemed like the ideal way to learn a language. I had started studying French, hoping it would get me into college, and then later, because I thought French proficiency would allow me to go to Paris to become a writer. However, I also liked the idea of going to Paris because it would be far away. Now I began to think about the possibility of going to Japan. Mentally, Japan felt much further away to me than Paris, whether or not that was actually the case when traveling from Portland, Oregon. And if I could have dared to admit it, Japan seemed much further away from my family. I felt that if I were living in Japan, it would be hard for their many requests for help to reach me. No one could accuse me of not caring about my family. They would understand I was just too far away. I dreamed of the kind of quiet and isolation one could have at such a distance from family demands. Even better, there would be no divorce. I wouldn't have to visit my father in Seattle in anguish when my father put the responsibility for his acts on me. I wouldn't have to avoid my mother's temper tantrums, tongue lashings, or occasional beatings. The more I thought about it, the more I liked the idea of going to live so far away. But how would I ever find the money to go to Paris or Japan, and a job I could do while I was there? I had no idea about how to solve these practical problems, but an intention was beginning to form in my mind. You never knew what you would find on the bookshelves in our house. A history book would be next to short stories or Shakespeare's plays next to an Agatha Christie mystery book. Mom had inherited many impressive first editions from her father, the newspaper editor, books he had purchased during the 1930s and 1940s. These were mixed indiscriminately with books my siblings and I had acquired for our own interests, like the philosophical writings of Carlos Castaneda, Randy's contribution, and the paintings of Paul Klee, clearly Janet's contribution. Moreover, we never got rid of books. Once a book came into the house, it didn't leave. Because my interests changed over time, when I perused the shelves, it often felt like it was the first time again. One afternoon, a title caught my eye. Another Country. Short and clear, suggesting travel, culture, surprised expectations. Author James Baldwin. That was a name I knew. I'd seen him on television, a small man, very dark, with large, bulging eyes, waving a cigarette between his fingers. It was a thick little paperback with a picture of apartment buildings on the front, the kind I associated with New York City, although I'd never been there. The blurb on the back talked about love and used phrases like tenderness and brutality, which sounded very exciting. I brought the book back upstairs to my room, started reading, and it was hours before I put it down again. Another Country shook me upside down every which way and profoundly upset my ways of thinking. It was the first time I had encountered a book that was about a world in which I had been planted by my mother, the place in which white and black lives were complexly intertwined. The characters in the novel, Vivaldo, Richard, Cass, Eric, Eve, Ida, and others, were facing all the conflicts and challenges of race in American society that I was facing, more or less. White and black prejudice, hetero and homosexual, religious and atheist. I couldn't believe someone had written a book that took in all of this. But it wasn't just the discussions about race and relationships. I also drank in the setting of New York City, wondering what it would be like to live in such a cosmopolitan place, have affairs, drink music at dives, and be a creative person of some sort. Another country even had a part that took place in France, and I used my little pocket French dictionary to painstakingly translate the French words I found in the text. Most of all, I loved how everyone in the book was trying to make sense of their lives, trying to figure out how to connect to and how to separate from lovers, and how making love was part of the creativity. I desperately wanted to talk to someone about the book. Surprisingly, I don't remember talking to either Mom or Evan about Baldwin or Another Country. I think I wanted to separate my incredible find from them, making it something private of my own. I also didn't talk to any of my high school acquaintances about it. There was one person whom I thought might know more about Baldwin and appreciate Another Country as much as I did, and that was Richard Moffat, the pianist at Theater Workshop. Extremely well-read, gay, and black. I thought there was a good chance he was knowledgeable of Baldwin. The following Sunday, at our rehearsal for Theater Workshop, I struck up a conversation with Richard. Sometimes between our dance routine rehearsals, he would step outside for a cigarette. This particular evening, I joined him at his favorite park bench. "Have you read James Baldwin?" I asked him with deep seriousness. "Oh, yes, darling," he said, bobbing his head as he spoke. "What are you reading by Baldwin?" "I just discovered Another Country, and I think it's like the most important book I've ever read." "Oh, well, you must read Giovanni's Room," said Richard, delicately pointing his cigarette towards me in emphasis. "He uses songs there. If you know the song, you will read the text and hear the music. The music floats in and out of the text. Absolutely amazing." "I'll get it," I promised seriously. He finished his cigarette, stamped it out in the dirt, and got up to return to rehearsal. As I stood up as well, I was suddenly so glad that I had someplace to go where someone I knew would know about James Baldwin. Grant High School was not shaping up to be that place. Only recently I'd been working on a project with my classmates in social studies class and suggested we go to the downtown library to get some materials. They had never been there before and didn't even know how to get there. One of them had a car, so I ended up serving as tour guide, which was fun, but it was surprising to me how little they knew about their own city, much less the main library that was like a second home to me. What were they going to do in their future lives? Live in the same neighborhood and marry the girl next door? These were not people I could talk to about James Baldwin. One night, soon after, I went down to the TV room in the basement carrying a small can of black paint, a narrow brush, and my copy of Another Country. At the doorway, I stopped and surveyed the white walls, planning my next move. I set my copy of the book behind me on the day bed, splayed open to the first quote I had in mind. I had not apprised my family of what I was about to do, because in our family, the rule was, if it's creative, it's okay. Sometimes that backfired, to be sure, but I was willing to risk it. Using a dirty fork I found on the floor, I pried the lid off the can, then dipped my brush into the inky black paint, swirling it around to mix it up. Slowly and carefully, I began to paint quotations from Another Country on the white walls. I worked with intensity, breathing in the meaning of each letter that became a word and that then became a sentence. This, I thought, is one of the most meaningful things I have ever done. After an hour or so, I had covered the walls with quotations. Forever after, I believed we would all be imbued with important words James Baldwin had set down in this book. These texts would now be intermingled with the evening news, Gilligan's Island, and the countless old cowboy movies we watched in our little basement TV room. And we would be the better for it. Of that, I was sure. I headed back upstairs, proud that I had been able to build this shrine to James Baldwin. No one but my family might ever see it, but that didn't matter. As my mother often said, it's the thought that counts. I expected some kind of reaction from my family, but as far as I remember, there was no reaction at all to the writing on the walls in the basement room. Maybe a bored shrug, but no comments from anyone. This was in sharp contrast to the time Randy and I had set up a project for the little kids, Virginia, Vaughn, and Fee, to finger paint the refrigerator in the kitchen. Once all three got into the paint, it had turned into quite a mess. They were covered with finger paint, and the refrigerator had turned into a purple-brown blob in the corner of the kitchen. That was the moment Janet, a high school freshman, walked into the house, took one look at the refrigerator, and started screaming bloody murder about how we were ruining her life and she'd never be able to bring her friends home again. But the quotes on the wall in the basement received not one scream. Years later, when I asked my brother Randy about it, he said he had absolutely no memory of the Baldwin quotations painted on the wall. For all my love of reading, I hated my English class. The teacher was tall and stiff with iron gray curls and wore a uniform of tweedy straight skirts, crisply ironed blouses with curved collars, and neat cardigans. In her class, we had to sit in rigid rows in pre-assigned seats based on the alphabetization of our names. And once established on the first day, the seating never changed for the whole year. Frankly, nothing changed in that room. Based on the assigned seating, I was quite far back in a middle row, a place I would normally never sit because I was so short and nearsighted and tried to avoid wearing my glasses. The girl who was assigned to sit in front of me was tall, blonde, and had a pimply neck, which I couldn't avoid looking at as I kept my eyes forward, trying to pay attention. We read whatever was on the list for the junior year of high school English in the Portland Public Schools. Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter dragged on, and then Stephen Crane's The Red Badge of Courage seemed equally endless and stupid. I think there may have also been something by Edith Wharton. I can't remember the other titles or authors, but I found no value in these choices. Moreover, the instructional technique never varied. We read a chapter on our own and then were expected to come to class and ask and answer questions, as the teacher refereed the questions and the answers. This approach never sparked a true exchange or dialogue. It was as if every question or answer was another dead end. We weren't long into the school year when I realized I was one of the few who was actually reading the boring texts. So I started asking questions and making comments to fill in the gaps. I found I was pretty good at it, picking things out of the text to talk about, so I kept doing it. One day towards the end of the year, as my mental folder for what I hate about Grant High School in Northeast Portland grew to overflowing, I hit my limit for the boring class. That day in question was also the day of an English test, for which I was prepared for. But I was in an explosive mood, and instead of writing the answers to my test in English, I chose to write in French. But then I went further. I didn't just write the test answers in French. I wrote them in French, and I wrote what I thought about the English class and the instructor. It wasn't complimentary. I am not sure what I was thinking. Did I think English teachers couldn't read French, or did I think my teacher wouldn't simply walk across the hall to consult the French teacher? The next day, my English teacher asked me to come in after school to speak with her, and my heart sank. My act of defiance was not going to be ignored. After students had cleared out of the school at the end of the day, I made my way to my English classroom where I faced my teacher alone. She stood tall and ramrod straight next to her desk. As I approached, I realized how much taller she was than me, and I felt dwarfed in her shadow. "I suppose you didn't know I was a double French and English major in college," she said. "I could read everything you wrote. Your French is terrible. Do you plan on going to college?" "Yes." "Well, I wouldn't. I don't think you'll get far. You're not cut out for it." With those cutting words, she sought to shame me. I hoped she wouldn't tell my mother, who would have been furious at my actions, although if I told her the teacher said I wasn't cut out for college, my mother might have turned her anger on the teacher. I knew Evan wouldn't act on a problem like this, and I was afraid he would think this was a kind of dumb thing to do. Why, I wondered, however, didn't the English teacher ask me why I did this thing? Why didn't she ask me what was bothering me about this class? And how could she make it more relevant to me? I longed to attend a school where students' voices would matter, and teachers would consider it normal to ask students for their opinions or ideas before the student blew his or her stack, like I had done. Thank you to Westford Community Access Television for providing facilities and production support, all of which made this podcast possible.